Welcome. We're here today because we wanted to talk to you about the 3 Ps of a pandemic workplace. As we are bringing our employees back, or for those of you who may never have shut down, there are some things that we need to do in order to prepare our workplaces. And so in the interest of giving you a framework, and I want to explain, we're providing a framework because we believe there's so many different businesses that are on this call today, that framework, what applies for one organization or business, may indeed not be exactly the same for the other. So we've broken this down into 3 specific areas: the physical environment, the people, and the policies. So if you haven't opened your doors yet and you want to step back and do a little self-audit, you can step back and say, okay, what do I need to do physically? What do I need to do about the people? And what do I need to do about my policies and procedures? So let's begin right now by taking a look at the physical environment. We know that this is the area where our employees will see most of the change. There's no longer the congregation around the water cooler or the coffee pot. There's no longer break rooms that are packed full at lunchtime. No longer can we have processes that put employees in contact with each other without the appropriate protective equipment in place. We know that organizations will be challenged in every aspect because from the moment that employee sets foot on your property, or may even continue to work from home, this entire environment has changed. Let's talk about a few things, and then Jeannie's going to come in and give us some examples of what Genedge has seen and what they're doing as well. In the physical environment, you first want to look at your building and what needs to change. Do you need to add sneeze guards? Do you need to mark specific spaces on floors? Do you need to direct traffic down particular hallways? How many people can be in the elevator if indeed your building has an elevator? All of the physical environment becomes a place in which you have to stop and look and see, does this allow us to comply with social distancing? And that could mean moving desks. It could be realigning a manufacturing environment. It could very well be any type of change that allows employees to operate in a safe and effective manner. Secondly, we need to take a look at your processes, and your processes involve any way in which an employee performs a task that they are responsible for. This could be changing how they do collection of samples. This could change how they go and get supplies. There's plenty of things. Recently, I was watching this as I had been out in the world, and I noticed when I was in FedEx office that they now have the floor marked 6 feet, and one of the employees is not allowed to be at the counter when the customer is at the counter. So one steps back 6 feet, puts the information on the counter, the other steps up when the other steps back. So even processes will change when it comes to how this all plays out. Now, it's important to say that at this point in time, you also have the understanding that a process change affects your bottom line. So where before you may have been able to do X number in a certain period of time, that indeed may decrease or perhaps could increase if you find an innovative, efficient way to change that process. So Jeannie, let's talk about this in terms of some of the things that you've seen, and we've given you some key areas to consider under this physical framework.
Hi, everybody. So my background is manufacturing, and I've been in touch with some of the local manufacturers to find out exactly what they're doing, as they have, some of them have shut down and are now reopening. Some of them have been open the whole time. They have gotten very creative with their scheduling. They are rotating start times so that they don't have everybody congregating at time clocks at the same times every day. They've rotated break times, so they've increased their break times to make sure that everyone is able to get breaks, but they're not all in the break rooms at the same areas. They have spaced where they can on production lines. Sometimes that's not always feasible. Sometimes you have to be within a few feet of the person next to you, and you can't go that 6 feet. They are using masks. They are using face shields when they can get them. They are marking spaces when they can for social distancing. They have put up sneeze guards where they can, and using the one-way aisles. If they have information that they need to put out to a group, they do that in either larger areas inside the facility, or they do it outside where they can space out. And of course, we've all seen studies that have shown that fresh air is beneficial. Again, it's reducing the use of the break rooms and the areas around the time clocks, the gathering stations. They're doing increased cleaning and sanitation. They've added hand sanitizer at the entrances. They've added hand sanitizer along the lines in different areas because they are touching a lot of the same parts and a lot of the same equipment.
And I think that emphasis on the cleanliness and the sanitation, that's really important. We have seen clients who have gone from cleaning offices once a week to literally every day having somebody come in, wipe down the phones, wipe down the desks, make sure that keyboards are cleaned, and all of this. Many of our clients have put that responsibility on the employees as well. Make sure you clean the keyboard of your computer. Make sure if you're using even the photocopier or any shared technology, make sure that there's some kind of cleaning mechanism nearby where they can wipe the keypad of the copier or the printer or so forth or so on. So I think really again, this is a big consideration to step back and walk yourself through your building and say, where in this building is there any place or any physical environment where someone could become sick or someone could, you know, have the risk by being in a contained or a enclosed space. So let's move then now to the second area, and that is to the people. Right now, we know a couple things, that if you look at some of the Gallup polls or the Pew Research polls, a large population of our employees are not interested in returning to work, not because they don't want to work or earn a paycheck, because they're simply afraid that there's so much unknown around this virus and around hearing different messages in media as to face masks work, no they don't work. And so because there's so many conflicting messages, there's high levels of skepticism among employees that they will actually return to a safe environment. So one of the things employers need to consider is where is it making the best sense to keep employees at home? And in many instances, employers have decided that only certain employees will return to the physical building. In one way that helps because it reduces the total population inside a certain amount of square footage. In other instances, it allows for the employees to feel that they can still be productive and yet be safe in their own home. We've noticed a couple things here. That obviously the question of masks comes into place. Are they mandatory? And I think you have just in Virginia, there are some mandatory standards around wearing masks, screening people for temperatures when they come to work, or even clients or customers being screened. We've noticed that especially in the area of supplies, and we jokingly put this little toilet paper on there, but employees really feel concerned that there's going to be sufficient supplies, especially around things that they themselves have been short on during their time at home. We know that some of the trends will be using more online training. And this bottom picture here where it says continue safe hygiene, I wanted to put that picture there to tell you that we're going to talk in a moment about communications with employees. And the CDC has a wonderful website where they have lots of these postings already ready for you. You can simply download them and post them throughout your workplace. So let's kind of refocus on those three key areas to consider under the employee arena. First is the impact on employee well-being. We know that many of these employees have really been shaken by this pandemic. There are clients of mine, I have one client who in particular, they have an employee who has lost multiple family members to this virus. So in that instance, this person has sustained real loss in their life. So we need to understand that when they come back, there's going to be changes in behavior. People may be more hesitant, there may be more emotional undertones or outbursts. We understand too that for some people, this was no big deal and they jumped on a plane and went to New York to join the healthcare fight there. So we really have to have that compassionate understanding that people are coming back in different places. We want to look for resources for the employees, employee assistance programs. You can perhaps also look at your insurance program. Some insurance companies right now, they've brought some resources available to people that they cover for this very particular reason. The third item, and this one came to me earlier this week, kind of in a story from a colleague, that they had someone who returned to the workplace who had been diagnosed and treated for the virus, and they actually had a emergency health situation happen. They thought they were fine. It had happened. They had been treated at the beginning of March. They were all set, ready to go, came back to the workplace, and they ended up going to the hospital. So the last thing I think it's important is to make sure that we consider that impact on the well-being, and we protect them by reviewing the emergency response or first aid procedures. First aid is another place in your business that will change, because no longer will we be having mouth-to-mouth or CPR. All of those first aid procedures will also change. And most importantly, we need to make sure employees know that in the event that there is some kind of medical emergency in the office or in the workplace, we've reviewed with them the response procedures. Communications is huge. Posting notice for employees as well as clients and customers. So many things are going to be different now, and we need that clear and concise and transparent communications. One, for the safety of employees. Two, for their sense of security, that there's leadership that's got this under their belt, they're moving forward. And lastly, training and development. I think it was a moment ago we talked about, does it make sense to have employees sign a letter when they take their job offer back? Well, we really need to look at our employees as if they're all new employees, because the workplace they left 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago is not the same workplace that they're joining today. And just as you would reorient a new employee to your business, you would want to do the same with reorienting those employees who are returning. And I think we'll see this, and I know Jeannie's got some good points here on the different methods for training. So all of this impact on employees, it's going to be big, but I think that we can certainly overcome this and use these tactics to successfully bring our employees back to the organization. Jeannie?
Yes, one of the things that I was reviewing earlier this week was from Woods Rogers, and the EEOC has updated pandemic guidance that they developed in 2009 when H1N1 was spreading, and they've issued current guidance tailored specifically to COVID-19's pandemic that may be helpful in answering some of those questions. What to do when an employee calls in scared to come to work or doesn't want to come back because they're afraid. Communications is always going to be your number one key with your employees. If you're clear, you're concise, and you're transparent, they tend to follow. You can post communications at entrances so that they can read them. If you have a company social media page, that's an excellent way, particularly with a younger workforce, to get information out, because they are all over social media, as we all know. But being clear, being concise, and to the point, and realizing that this is a shifting environment. What holds true today may not be true on Monday. Because so much keeps changing with this. It's ever fluid, and our communications need to be fluid as well.
Yep, absolutely. I think also, just one more point around the employees, I think the word compassion is probably a really good word for this time and place. And I want to frame that in the sense of bottom line business orientation, because so many of our employees contribute directly to our bottom line. We know that performance changes will increase productivity. We know that emotional well-being and engagement, all of that comes to our bottom line in terms of employee satisfaction and productivity. So right at this point in time, while we want to get our businesses back up and running, where we want to get them to the place where we were before, and we know that that before may never be the same, we still want to be compassionate with our employees and understanding that this isn't like, okay, you're back, you're gone, and now you're back. It's you've come back to a whole new world. So let's look then at the last area that's important for employers to consider, and that's policies and procedures. As many of you have heard on our call today, and as you will know when you deal with a lot of the employment issues that are coming, there are a whole lot of regulations that have been changed or impacted. Right now, I think it's a worthwhile time to take a look at your employee handbook and say, which of these policies and procedures have changed? We have areas where before we wouldn't ask questions about an employee's medical history, and now we're asking about COVID-19. There's documentation related to that needs to be considered. There's decisions, many of them we've touched on this morning. What if someone chooses not to return to work? What if somebody has been sick or has been, truly emotionally impacted and could have Americans with Disabilities Act considerations? How do those come into place? Now, we know as employers that employment regulations are applied depending upon size, depending upon industry, and so on. So for the purpose of a call like this, it's really challenging to try to say hard and fast, let me address every one. So I invite you and encourage you to reach out to organizations that offer that kind of information, speak with your corporate legal counsel, and try to get a really good understanding of where those regulations changed. We're going to touch base on a couple in a few moments. But really, those policies that relate to employment decisions need a thorough review at this time. And again, I say that with the idea that it is to be fluid, because these are changing as the rules change. We also need to take an understanding or take a look at where the policies and procedures changed. For example, like with cleaning. 25 years ago, when I did the first employee handbook, I don't remember ever having any policies in the handbook about cleaning your workspace or keeping your workspace cleaned and sanitized. That's truly an important policy that now should get some attention, whether it is in your procedures manuals or in your handbook, because that cleanliness is so important. That's not an option anymore. That's a mandate. So looking at those types of changes in the workplace and ensuring that you're complying with them in your policy and procedure manuals and in your handbooks. And so let's wrap up with these last three areas to consider. Applicable legislation, federal, state, local employment laws and regulations. There are great websites out there. Especially visit the CDC and visit your local health department. They have great resources and guidelines available for you. I think you'll also want to take a look at your compensation and benefits. For those employees who were considered frontline, there's consideration of bonuses or hazard pay. If you are finding it's challenging to bring employees back, there are instances where attendance bonuses could be implemented to help encourage those types of to help encourage employees to be back and consistently attending at work. And then lastly, as we talked about, employee handbooks and procedures manuals, your policy changes, communicating to them, to the employees. And I want to give you an example under this, because OSHA regulations have even changed. All of a sudden, these new chemicals that we're bringing into the workplace need material safety data sheets. So really every aspect in some way or another has been impacted by this. So Jeanne, I know you had some ideas and thoughts you wanted to include as well.
One of the things to be aware of with the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, for employer paid leave, I was reviewing, and if you want FFCRA's payroll tax credits, it is good practice to have employees fill out a form verifying the circumstances of their leave. Documentation is necessary because of why an employee takes leave. In other words, to care for a child that's been out of school, or a parent with COVID-19, or because they themselves have COVID-19. It affects the amount of tax credits earned. So that's very important for you to be aware of. The IRS is putting the burden on employers to track and verify it all, and that is something that we all need to be aware of. The VEC is an excellent resource for those in Virginia. Also, the Department of Labor, they're constantly shifting and constantly updating policies. I know when this all first came down and we gave the governor gave the safer at home order and Genedge went to at home work. I mean, I was pumping out a virtual work policy within hours. Within hours, that policy had to be out so that everyone knew. And we've made changes to some of those policies. When we've now, as we're starting to go back into our and visit our clients face to face, because we fall under DOD regulations, we have to have facial coverings. That was even before the governor announced that was going to be mandatory in Virginia if we could not practice social distancing. The incentive pay for attendance bonus, that's a big one. And a lot of companies in this area where I am in the South Side offer an attendance bonus anyway, but you may be able to up that attendance bonus to get people back in the door. As far as policy updates for all of our people, we're able to work from home. We're all connected. We all have some sort of connectivity. So I'm able to send those policies out electronically. But it's important to remember, particularly in more rural areas, that the employees may not have connectivity at home. They may not have the ability to get the internet at home, or they may not have high-speed internet. We've all dealt with broadband, and we know how difficult it is to download something with not broadband, with dial-up. So we need to be aware of that with our employees as well. Some of our employees are older and they don't want to be on the internet. They don't trust it. So we need to make sure that we're able to communicate those policies, even if we have to mail them out to them ahead of time. And that will help put their minds at ease.
And I think also just a point, when you change a policy, we've always had a rule of thumb that if you've mandated a new policy, you also as the employer have an obligation to make sure the employees have what they need in order to comply with that policy. And so if we're going to mandate face coverings for clients who may show up at your organization without one, then we need to have those supplies on hand so that we can enforce that and demonstrate to the employees that we're complying with that policy and procedure as well. I think on that note, Jeannie, anything else you wanted to add on physical, on people, or on policies?
The best thing I can say is just be clear and concise with your communications. Be ready for everything to change at the drop of a hat, because we know that it is. What is priority right now may not be priority Monday. There may be a whole new priority. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. This is such a dynamic situation that we are all in, and it's uncharted territory for many of us.
Exactly. So on that note, we'd like to thank you. And we've just given you Sam Wolford, as many of you know. He's the Regional Growth Manager. And we have put together a list of resources that if you would be interested in receiving it, please reach out to Sam. It's just a list of websites and some other places where employers can reach out, get some information, and be able to navigate this very fluid and changing environment. And so that's all for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise and Jeanne. A couple of things. Do you have a sample of an attendance bonus policy that you could share a link to that we could share that they could take a look at?
We can certainly add that to the list of resources, and we can get that to you. I'll direct that to Sam today and let him navigate that as well. There are wonderful compensation resources on the internet, so we'll get a resource for you there with that.
Okay, thank you. And to you all, or just to the general participants, how are you getting your hand sanitizers and wipes? They seem to be difficult to find in stores or online, so does anybody have any recommendations or suggestions for businesses to get hand sanitizers and wipes?
Becky, this is Cindy Fields. I know that I do have a business down in Bristol that has had access to sanitizers and masks. It's Jerry B. Peters Sales in Bristol, and I know that I think there may be some other businesses within our Southwest area that has that as well.
Okay, thank you. And we can include that in our follow-up email as well. One question, does anybody have any comments regarding fleet cars, policies on fleet cars and the sharing of automobiles? Does the burden fall upon the employer to clean those after each time, or the employee when the employee gets in?
I think in that instance, the ultimate responsibility is the employer. Now, how they choose to do that can come from some degree of innovation. They can make a policy that the person who uses the vehicle needs to clean it and specify certain cleaning parameters, like what chemicals need to be used. Does the upholstery get sprayed with a disinfectant, etc. They can also arrange for that to be a service, that once a week that vehicle is absolutely cleaned by a service, and then in the meantime it's cleaned by the individuals using the vehicle. I know this is probably not what most people would say, but we're looking at a time where there's like great opportunity for innovation in how we do things. And so, ideally what you want to say is how big is that fleet? How many cars are there? How many people are driving? How often are they driving in multiple vehicles? Also, I would encourage the employers to be putting sanitizer and wipes in those vehicles. If you would have those in your personal vehicle, I would put them in that vehicle. I would encourage perhaps, and this is my own position, the employers can make their decision. I would, at that point in time, I would no longer allow eating or drinking in the vehicle, because those are two places in which you really have increased opportunity for transmission. So I think it becomes that opportunity to be really innovative and say, okay, what about this situation can cause the risk or harm to the employee, and how do we address that?
Okay, thank you. We did have another answer. Norris Built has hand sanitizer. You can also post the phone number for that, so if someone needs to contact them. Is there any recommendations you have for your management, maybe on your floor or anything, as far as how they handle the privacy of a sick employee or employee distancing, and just the new procedures a manager would need to know?
Jeannie, did you want to?
I think the best way to deal with that is to go through the EEOC website, because it's going to give you the definitive guidance on what you can and cannot say, what you can and cannot ask. I know that some of our local employers are taking temperatures before anybody comes on the floor, and they are allowed to do that under the COVID-19 guidance on the EEOC website. But there are very specific questions that you're allowed to ask. There's very specific guidelines on what you're allowed to say. And that is your best resource, because it does change so fluidly.
Right. And I think in each of these instances, I've heard a client of mine telling me about an employee who was bullied because they had had the virus and had been completely cleared to come back to the workplace, tested 3 times, I believe, clean. So in that instance, we want to make sure we're sensitive, because a lot of the employees will find people who have had it or have had family members who have had it, they could be bullied, and the employer needs to protect that or minimize it to the best extent possible.
Great, thank you for that answer. How do you know if you need to update the chemicals you are using to clean with?
According to the CDC, soap and water will clean surfaces of the coronavirus. That's all you need. But if you are bringing in new chemicals, you've got to have the SDSs. If you've not normally had Clorox in your facility and now you're bringing Clorox in, you have to have the SDS for the Clorox. That is required.
Right.